know, Mike, a lot of the guys that actually come to the class wonder what kind of optic they should put on their own weapon system at home. What's your preference? What do you use?
Depends on what I'm doing. The optic is, you know, obviously probably the most important link between the shooter and the target. And obviously with what we learned this week, some of these more discriminating reticles, having that higher power isn't something we used to do. And, you know, I used to think, you know, 10 power is about as much glass as I wanted to have on any rifle. But
you know, they used to say that, you know, 1 power per every 100 yards or meters was all you needed. And maybe in the past that was acceptable, but in my world and what we're doing, pushing out at long range, if I can see better, I can shoot better. So I want all the power I can get. You know, we have everything here from 1 to 8s, which is actually a very good scope. But, you know, when people look at 1 to 8s, they say, well, hey, I can go from a 1 power all the way to 8 power. You know, even in a hunting environment, if you're hunting in the woods and you're not taking shots past 300, there's nothing wrong with something like this. And this actually has the H58 reticle in it. But again, it's not something personally that I would want to utilize going through a house, because I don't want to look through a tube. You know, if I had something like this and was actually running even as a secondary, the T1 that's mounted up on the system like this, off at a 45, you know, you can have it up and roll it over very quickly with both eyes open. And whether you're going through a house or just shooting a fast mover very quickly, you know, you don't have to wait and try to find him through that tube.
For sure. I mean, that prairie dog pops up at 7 yards and you need to get on him quick. That's
absolutely. So, you know, going from 1 to 8s, and like you talked about, something like a possibly a 2.5 to 10 or a 3 to 9, something that's more of a hunting type variety. You know, personally, I'm a big fan of power. I want more power. And, you know, the common misconception is that, you know, hey, too much power, the Mirage is going to blow you out, you can't utilize it. And
well, I found we could actually see through the Mirage better with the higher power.
Yeah, and what I try to tell the guys, Mirage is your friend. Mirage is telling you what's happening downrange. You know, when we were dealing with the 10 power scopes, you know, in my line of work doing training, what we found was that the kids that had the 10 power scopes on, they'd look downrange and they couldn't see the Mirage change. They couldn't see that wind change, you know, right before they broke the shot. But the guys that were actually running, you know, something like this, a 6.5 to 20 from Leupold, or, you know, Horus Vision's 5 to 20 power, when they had more power, they could actually see that change, you know, and they were like, hey man, wind's changing, now they're holding center, you know, if it started to bull or something. Where the 10 power, we couldn't see the Mirage. So I'm a huge fan of power. I think it's a big bonus for us. You know, we have probably the biggest problem once we start increasing our power is the size of the optic. You know, we have everything here from a small 1 to 8, and, you know, we have the Zeiss there. Go ahead and hold that up. This is a Zeiss, you know, 4 to 16, and one of the big benefits about the Zeiss is it's very short. And what you're going to see here in the very near future, you know, you look at something like the 5 to 25 Schmidt, which is a longer scope, but a magnificent scope. You know, the problem with it is, again, it's a large scope, you know, and I'm not concerned that much about the weight of my optic, especially when it's that kind of quality. But what I'm more concerned with is what kind of footprint I still have left for my night vision out in front of that weapons, or in front of that scope.
These longer optics are eating up a lot of real estate. I mean, especially with a weapon system, you know, like the Polk gun here, we're just dealing with an optic mount right here over the action and not having that continuous monolithic rail. You got to think about that.
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, once you start, you know, even on a weapon system like this where you just have a small amount of rail space still available, you know, that's something that you have to start thinking about. So what some companies are doing, they're actually trying to decrease the size of their optics, at least in the overall length. This is a 4 to 16, and you can actually see, you know, it's maybe an inch shorter than that one, you know, in the 5 to 25, but now Schmidt has a 3 to 20 power that's actually an inch shorter than the 4 to 16. So again, we're getting that maximum power. And what I've actually seen, you know, working through different power ranges all the time, different scope companies bringing stuff out, the 16 power I thought was the kind of more all-around good power. But what I've actually found now, you know, when we started working with the 5 to 20s in this Falcon from Horus Vision, the 20 power, I found that I stayed on 20 power all the time and I didn't have a problem. I wasn't dialing back down. And at 25 power, every now and then you may dial back down if the Mirage is horrible, as it can be out here sometimes. But the 20 power seems to be kind of optimal. Schmidt Mender has actually developed a 3 to 20 power, which, you know, I personally believed is the all-around scope, because we still have that 3-power for, you know, big field of view when you're dealing with something up close.
I mean, it's great to be able to have that power ring. To sometimes you don't know if you're in the position the right way, and you need to back off that power for a second to locate your target, reassess your position, adjust that bag, and then okay, now we're going to start settling in before we adjust parallax, which brings us into a couple of different ways of doing that. I mean, we've got these parallax adjustment knobs here on the side, sometimes referred to as a side focus knob, and then actually a large piece that's on the objective. What do you look for in that capacity?
You know, a lot of times it depends on our barrel profile, on whether you can run a 56, you know, or you may need a 50mm objective. That's something you're going to have to look at when you set it up, or look at the mounting system that you actually put on the scope. All right, but you know, when I'm looking at it, I want a very, you know, nice ocular focus adjustment. So again, we talked about this initially when you're setting up scopes. That's one of the biggest things that I see that people don't do correctly, is actually fix a parallax on their scope. So once you've actually set the ocular focus to where the reticle is super crisp, and being type A personalities, a lot of times we blow right past that, you know. So we get it close to where we can kind of see it, but it's not perfect. And then we set the, like you said, the target focus over here, or what is commonly called as the parallax, but the side focus on the side for the target. So once the target is very sharp, then we'll move our head up and down to make sure there is absolutely zero movement. If there is movement, then we go back, readjust this slightly, refocus here on the side focus, again, until that line does not move off what we're aiming at. So it's something, a lot of scopes are real different from, you know, leupolds, where you may have to turn this, you know, a couple of revolutions around. So don't be afraid to actually go ahead and play with it and move it around, because I've had some people think that, hey, you know, I can't get this fixed, and it was just that we had to rotate it several rotations before we could actually get it on. Once
you pretty much get this ocular adjusted and set, do you ever find yourself making any changes on it?
You know, I really don't, from person to person, you know, and really, I'll be honest, most of the time, and I thought I have 20/10 vision, or grew up with 20/10 vision, and as I'm getting older, that's starting to go away. So I need reading glasses up close, but actually in my job, it's become a benefit, because I can't see very well up close anymore as far as reading. So when I get down behind my students' rifles, I look through and I'm like, oh wow, how can he see that? And so I'm changing his actual, you know, ocular focus to make that reticle super crisp, because his younger eyes actually blow right past it and fix it. You know, they'll actually, you know, focus on that reticle even though that it is out of focus. So since my eyes won't adjust that quickly, I can set it for him and say, hey, try that, and he looks like, yeah, man, that's a little better. His eyes were just, you know, focusing on it very quickly and adjusting for it. So, you know, if you have good young eyes, you know, like yourself, go ahead and look outside, focus somewhere else, and look right back in the reticle. So if that reticle starts out blurry and then becomes sharp, that's something that you actually need to go ahead and make that adjustment. And if you're moving your head and you see that line separate from your target that you're aiming at, then you know you actually still have parallax, and that's what you need to fix. But you know, as we get older, maybe there are some benefits.
We got a lot of nice optics here on the table. Let's talk about some of the adjustments some of these scopes have. We've got everything from 1/4 minute elevation turrets here to 0.1 milrad to the Zeiss here with 1 centimeter at 100 meters.
Yeah, you know, working with the military guys, you know, the M3 Alphas on the M24s have 1 minute clicks. So every click equals 1 minute of angle.
It's not a very fine adjustment.
That's not a very fine adjustment for a precision rifle, exactly. This one here actually has 1/4 minute clicks, which that's a very nice system. The problem with that type of system, as far as I'm concerned, is why am I looking at a mil system inside my scope, being the reticle, and dialing in minutes of angle? Now, I know that's old school, and that's the way that it's been done forever, but you're starting to see a big trend to scopes like this, which are actually 10th mil corrections. It equals the amount of measurements that I'm looking at in my scope, which actually makes more sense. And it's, you know, people look at it and they go, well, I don't understand what a mil is, or, you know, a centimeter. You know, I was the same way, you know, being a country boy from West Texas, I didn't know a mil from a millipede, you know. So basically when I started shooting with, you know, utilizing mil dots and mil corrections, it really came to you very quickly. It's really intuitive. So it's not something that people have to get outside their comfort zone and try, you know, if they look at it once and try to play with it, very quickly it's going to pick up.
Do you see any benefit whatsoever to staying with a system, you know, quarter and half minute turrets?
No, actually, the quarter-minute turrets are fine. I like the meal turrets better, personally. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people that already have minute of angle or quarter-minute or half-minute or whatever they may have, you know, and there's some good scopes. Leupold makes a lot of good scopes with half-minute corrections left and right, you know, and even the M3 LRs, you know, or M3 Alphas that were 1 minute corrections, they have half-minute corrections on their windage. You know, a lot of times we actually hold wind. I'd rather have it reversed. I'd rather have half minute on my elevation and 1 minute on my windage. But, you know, the problem is you're going to have, when you do have a 1 minute correction on your elevation turret, you're either going to be a high shooter or a low shooter most of the time, meaning that I can't get it actually really zeroed, that my bullet's either going to strike just below my crosshair or just above my crosshair. And personally, I always want my bullet to hit on top of my crosshair if I can't get it, you know, dialed in correctly. But it's something, you know, I think you're going to see a big movement towards just having meals as far as turret goes, and really be aware.
A little bit of math.
Absolutely, really be aware. You know, when you start buying scopes, how the clicks feel, because that's the big difference that you're paying for when you actually look at buying scopes. You know, right here we had the 5 to 20 horus vision, which basically, as far as the glass goes, is excellent. You know, and it has a horus reticle that comes with it, and this scope sells for about $1,500. Where when you start looking at scopes like the Schmidt Mender scope, this may actually sell for closer to, you know, $2,700 to $3,000 with the H58 reticle in it. But that's one thing that you're looking at. What you're paying the extra money for is actually the mechanical adjustment being super correct. So when you actually calibrate that scope, you're going to aim at that little box at the bottom of the cat's target, and then as you dial 10 mils, you're going to see that bullet impact, you know, 10 mils high, hopefully. All right, so, and then you'll go ahead and dial another 10 mils up and see that bullet impact at 20 mils high. A lot of times your scope may not have that adjustment, but you can actually go up 1 mil, 2 mil, 3 mil, and actually see where that separation is and see if it's calibrated or not. You know, and not every scope will be calibrated, so it's something that you really need to know if you're dialing. You know, that was one of the huge advantages of the horus reticles, was we don't have to dial with them. You still can. That's one of the things, the misconceptions. Well, it's a horus reticle, so I still like to dial. Nothing takes that away from you. It's still a, you know, good quality scope. You can still dial if you want to, but you don't have to all the time.
So by skipping using a mechanical man-made mechanism with the reticle, you feel like we're going to get a finer adjustment by just holding off using that horus reticle?
Absolutely. You know, when you look at mechanical man-made clicks, even though companies do a very good job most of the time, you know, the quality companies in making those clicks be accurate, what we're finding is even when I use a horus reticle at the distances that we've been shooting this week, when you dial, you know, you're looking at shooting at, it could be as close as 1,285 meters, and we're holding 20 mils. I may want to dial 10 and hold 10. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're shooting a scope that's capable of being accurate.
So what you're paying for in one of these higher quality optics, in addition to the glass, you're getting a mechanism you can rely on.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, everybody at home can afford a $3,000 scope, you know, and that's one of the deals. That's like, you know, we kind of talked about earlier. How many rifles do you have at home? Do you have 5, 6, 7 rifles? How many scopes do you have? Most people put a scope on every rifle. And instead of having maybe a $400 or $500 optic on that weapon system, maybe you could sell all your scopes, get a quality optic, and utilize that one scope on everything. So you're shooting the best glass available, and you're still shooting it on all your weapon systems, you know. And some people had rather have scopes on everything, but personally, I'd rather have super glass, you know, really high quality glass, and enjoy it on every weapon system that I own. And if you're going to spend that kind of money and actually really get a nice high quality piece of glass, you really want to take care of it. So what we have here is the Tenon Brac scope cap covers. You know, this is nice soft rubber. All right, it has a nice detent in it to where it snaps, holds really nice and secure. This thing isn't going to be popping off. As you can see there, it pops on real nice. But this thing actually lays back pretty flat. You're not going to break these things from what I've actually played with them. So these things are really nice. You can see how flat they fold back so they're not sticking up in the air like this. But this is actually something that you need to think about if you're actually buying, you know, really any type of glass. You'd want to make sure you take care of it, and having good scope cap covers is something you need to look at.
Okay, so I think another feature that a lot of people look for in a scope is illumination of that reticle. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, when it comes to illumination, you know, I grew up hunting and we didn't have illuminated reticles, and you know, the people will tell you, you know, there's 15 minutes, you know, prior to sunrise and 15 minutes right at sunset or right after sunset that you're going to lose that reticle and you can't see it. And really, you know, going out and shooting a lot at those times, it's really a period of about 3 to 5 minutes. And, you know, in a tactical world, there'd be no reason, you know, why you'd want to, you know, start something at that period without already having, you know, that night vision on. So if you're hunting and you don't have night vision, you know, illuminated reticle, there's really nothing wrong with it. You know, I don't see that much advantage in having illumination personally. It's something a lot of people like. It's one of those things, some people want it, some people don't. You can save a little bit of cost not having it. And to be honest, it's one of those things, some people like it, some people don't care about it. You know, I'm kind of stuck in the middle. There's times I've had illuminated reticles now for the past 7 years, you know, and running them every day pretty hard. And to be honest, you know, as far as going out and hunting with them, I've only actually lit them up twice in the past 7 years. So we don't use illuminated reticles very much, at least in the line of work in my training that we do.
Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to get this optic on the weapon system.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that you really have to kind of be careful about, because there's a lot of rings out there that you have to take time and lap because the surface areas won't match up with your scope, and you're only gripping the very tip of your scope or the very back of your scope in those rings. So, you know, it's, again, that's one of those things that you're attaching a $3,000 potentially piece of glass to your $4,000 or $5,000 weapon. And it doesn't have to be that way. It could be a $600 scope on your $800 rifle at home, but you're still going on your deer hunt and you don't want to miss a deer because your mounting system, you know, the interface there. So again, it's something that you really need to take time and, you know, do some studying. And personally, I prefer the LaRue quick detach system, you know, and it's pretty controversial. A lot of people don't like levers. They don't think it's a real secure hold. You know, but I've actually done testing to where we actually, you know, took and locked this in to a Picatinny rail, all right? And then once we actually locked it in and aimed at a target and actually dialed a crosshair, you know, to where it was perfect, and then took it off, once we locked in like this, you could actually see your crosshairs were off the target, but once you know, activated that camming system, once it cammed in, the crosshairs settled right back perfect every time. So I went out and shot it. You know, I'd shot it previously before we actually set it up and run it on a camera and sat there and watched it align itself back up every time. In shooting it, I'd taken it off, put it back on, shoot, take it off, put it back on, shoot, and I'd done that over 100 shots. And really what I found was the gun was maintaining the minute of accuracy that the gun was able to actually maintain. So I was actually, you know, really shocked at how well they actually really do hold accuracy, taking it off and putting it back on. You know, and this is something, again, that you can use with multiple different weapon systems, you know, whether it's a AR style platform or a bolt gun, as long as it has a 1913 standard Picatinny rail. And as you'll remember, when we actually changed scopes from, you know, past your scope to the right drill, we actually, you know, Travis had his scope with these levers, and when we gave it back to him to re-zero his gun, he just put it back on, shot his same dope on the targets that were downrange, and was immediately back on target. You know, so another thing that we actually need to cover though is actually torquing all this down. Now, again, when we start doing our levers, you need to have these contact at about 45 to 60 degrees, like right there, right when they make contact. Personally, I like mine pretty tight, so really I want this at about 60 degrees when they make contact. All right, once you do that, you lock in the back. All right, now this one is actually set up right now on a different 1913 standard Picatinny rail, which means they're not all standard because that one's a little bit loose. All right, but then we actually need to take and torque these down. Personally, I'll actually torque them down to probably 20 to 25 pounds, depending on what I'm using. But 20 pounds is a good torque to actually do that with. Now, another system that you can actually utilize, or what a lot of people actually have, is something similar to what we have here, whether it's Nightforce or Badger or whoever. And this system here, you know, you're going to have to torque these down. You know, you can get a wrench. It is a 65 inch-pound torque wrench. But what most people do, they just run up here and snap them over. And that's something that really I kind of teach against. What I like to do is, you know, if you want to make sure it pops twice, that's fine. But on that last time, just turn it barely right before it snaps, then let off. We know we already actually have the torque on it, but what I don't want it to is reverberate. I don't want it to hit and come off a little bit.
So that way I don't end up with one ring torqued down to 65 and one torqued down to 62.5.
Absolutely. So once you hear that snap, then the next one's just bring it over till it starts to snap, and you can actually feel it, you know, starting to roll loose from that cam, and then come back down.
Imagine that gets pretty important with calibers like 338 Lapua and even some of the 300 Win Mags without a can on it. That recoil could probably, you know, back those bolts off to where you're getting a shift in zero.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have seen that a lot. And like you're talking about, even with the larger calibers, as much as we shoot with the 308s, you know, 200-300 rounds a day, we actually have them actually slip off, you know, a couple of times this year. So it's something that you have to check. I would advise probably every day, you know, go ahead and snap them in. You know, something that we have to be aware of, when we're taking off our scope and putting it back on, you can't just place it anywhere on that rail system and it maintain, you know, it's zero. So what most people do, they'll actually mark their rail somewhere, or you can put these index clips on. All right, once you put the index clips on, then you know that you can actually push it forward to that one spot, you know, and sometimes guys will put them behind and in front, and you know exactly where you were at. So those are nice little pieces of gear that you can actually have to remind you exactly, if you do take your scope off, where to put it back to.
So bottom line, if I'm going to be investing in a weapon system like some of these here, it really isn't doing its service unless I'm putting a good quality piece of glass on it. I mean, if I've got a gun that I've spent the money on that has that quarter-minute capability, I'm not really going to be able to extract that capability with a subpar piece of glass.
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot of different things that you can look at when you're buying glass, from, you know, illumination to power to nice, you know, parallax. But one thing, you know, that you really got to be aware of is this is just a small smidgen of what's on the market. You know, there's a lot of good companies that make a lot of good optics. You know, there's a lot of different reticle choices out there. Educate yourself, you know, understand what you're looking for, and then whatever money that you can spend, this is something I wouldn't skimp on. This is probably more important to me than, you know, most rifles that we can buy even off the shelf are pretty good rifles. But optics is actually something that you really need to invest in, and that's the way I look at it. This is an investment. You know, your rifle is an investment as well, but you can't get what you have out of your rifle. You can't enjoy the accuracy that you're buying with your rifle unless you have a good scope.